I was at the pump early that morning topping off my truck before heading in when I noticed her car pull up fast, a little too fast for a gas station, and before I could even put the nozzle back, she was already out of her vehicle walking straight toward me like she had been waiting for this moment, and without even a greeting, she pointed at the pump and told me to fill her tank because, as she put it, "RAR." Residents like me were supposed to help keep the community running, and I honestly thought she was mice. I fitted and keep joking at first because nothing about that made sense, but the look on her face told me she was completely serious, and when I calmly said no and explained that this was a public station and I was just another customer, she did not like that answer at all. Her expression changed instantly and she started talking louder, making sure people nearby could hear, saying I was being uncooperative and disrespect. You fool, and throwing around words like rules and authority, even though none of that applied here. And I could see a couple of other customers glance over because the situation was getting uncomfortable fast. But I kept my voice steady and repeated that I was not going to pay for her fuel and that she needed to handle it herself. And that is when she pulled out her phone and said if I was not going to cooperate, she would call the police and have me removed from the property for creating a disturbance. A fable lease. And I almost laughed at that point because the logic made no sense, but I also knew how these sort of situations can spiral. So I stayed calm and let her do whatever she thought would help her case. And within a couple of minutes, she was on the phone describing the situation in a very one-sided way. Say I had. I was refusing to follow community expectations and causing a scene, and I could tell by the way she was talking that she expected the officers to show up and immediately take her side, like this was just another situation she could control with pressure. But what she did not know was that I had already finished fueling and was simply waiting now, not because I had to, but because I was curious to see how this would play out, and more importantly because I recognized the tone of her call and the four claims she was making, and I knew that when officers arrived, they would need to hear both sides clearly and not just the version she was pushing. And as she ended the call, she looked at me with that confident expression like she had just secured a win and told me I had a few minutes before things got serious, and I just nodded and leaned against my truck, watching the situation unfold without any rush, because I knew something she did not, and I was not about to reveal it yet. And the few minutes that Bethaver followed were quiet but tense, the kind of silence where everyone around pretends not to watch, but clearly is. And when the patrol car finally pulled in, the atmosphere shifted immediately. She straightened, Dee up and stepped forward, ready to present her story again, but the moment the officer stepped out and looked in my direction, there was a brief pause, a recognition that changed everything. And that was the exact moment I knew the entire situation was about to flip in a way she could not recover from. The officer stepped out of the patrol car and walked toward us, and before she could even start talking again, he looked at me with a calm expression and gave a small nod that most people would not ice, but it was enough to shift the entire situation because now there was context. She did not understand and she jumped in quickly, trying to control the narrative, saying I refused to give her free gas and was creating a disturbance, and that she felt unsafe and needed immediate action in the OC. The officer listened without interrupting, then turned to me and asked if everything was all right, and I answered clearly that there was no disturbance. I had simply declined to pay for someone else's fuel, and that was the entire issue. And there was a brief silence after that where the facts settled in, and you could almost see the realization start to form on his face. She tried again, raising her voice slightly, saying that as part of the community there were expectations and that I was ignoring them. And at that point the officer asked her a simple question: what exact rule required a private citizen to pay for another person's gas at a public station? And she hesitated because there was no real answer. And that hesitation changed the tone immediately, because now the situation was no longer about pressure, it was about facts, and once that line is crossed, it becomes very difficult to maintain a false claim. The officer then calmly explained that this was not a police matter and that no law had been unbroken, and that refusing to pay for someone else's purchase was not a violation of any kind. And as he said that, I could see her confidence start to fade because the outcome she expected was not happen. Gaining in the control she thought she had was slipping away in real time. She looked at me again like she was trying to figure out why this was not working, and that is when I decided it was time to be clear, not in a dramatic way, just simple and direct. I told her that calling the police over sometimes seemed like this was unnecessary and that situations like this are taken seriously because they tie up resources that could be needed elsewhere, and I kept my tone calm because there was no reason to escalate anything further. The officer agreed and added that misuse of emergency services can lead to consequences if it becomes a pattern, and that statement carried weight because it was not a threat, it was a fact. And once it was said, the situation shifted completely from her trying to enforce something, meaning to her needing to step back and reassess what she had done. At that point, she tried to soften her stance, saying there must have been a misunderstanding and that she was only trying to maintain standards, but the reality was already clear to everyone there. This was never about standards. This was more than the buzz, about pushing authority where it did not exist and expecting compliance without question. The officer wrapped things up by confirming that there was no issue and that everyone was free to go, and as he turned to leave, he gave me another quick nod, the same subtle acknowledgement from before, and that was the end of it from a legal standpoint. But the impact of that moment stayed, because situations like this tend to carry forward in quieter ways. I finished up and got back into my truck, and as I pulled out, I saw her standing there still processing what had just happened. The confidence from earlier completely gone, replaced by a realization that things do not always go the way she expects, and sometimes pushing too far brings the opposite result. Later that day, I thought about how easily the situation could have escalated if I had reacted differently or matched her tone. But staying calm allowed everything to unfold naturally and kept it grounded in facts, which is always the stronger position in faith. Moments like this, now I want to hear from you. If someone tried to pressure you like that in a public place, would you stand your ground or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy the stories like this, make sure to share it with someone who understands the importance of boundaries, and follow HOA Revenge Files for more real situations that show how quickly things can turn when lines are crossed.